Welcome to the latest edition of Stars, Cells, and God. This is the podcast where we explore the discoveries that are happening at the frontiers of science and look at what those discoveries mean for the Christian faith. Look at how these discoveries provide us with new evidence for God's existence and the reliability of the Old and the New Testaments. This podcast is sponsored by Reasons to Believe. If you want to know more about the organization that sponsors this podcast, please go to our website, www.reasons.org, or you can follow us on social media, RTB_official. And then also visit our YouTube channel, Reasons to Believe 1, where you can get access to all kinds of great content laying out the relationship between science and the Christian faith. And of course, if you're there, make sure you hit the notification button so that you can be informed as to when the next episode of Stars, Cells, and God will drop. My name is Fuz Rana. I'm a biochemist and a Christian apologist, and I have the pleasure of being joined in studio today by Dr. David Block, a renowned astronomer.
Thank you, Fuz. It's lovely to be here.
And yes, and a man of God.
Yes.
And so,
amen.
Yeah, David is going to share with us a little bit about the James Webb Telescope images and what this means for the anthropic principle. And then I'm going to talk a little bit at the other extreme of the universe about viruses and specifically the function of endogenous retroviruses in the human genome.
Isn't it wonderful that you can talk on the microcosm and I can talk on the macrocosm?
Yes, it's beautiful that way, right? All right, well, David, why don't you go ahead and start us off today? So tell us a little bit about the James Webb Telescope and the images coming from it and why you're so excited as an astronomer, but also as a Christian who sees evidence for God's fingerprints and
everywhere,
creation.
Yes. Well, of course, the beauty of the James Webb Space Telescope is that it's not an optical telescope, it's an infrared telescope. And that's terribly important because up to now, telescopes such as the Hubble Space Telescope are primarily optical, and the problem there, Fuzz, is what we call shrouds of the night. The universe, galaxies, dust masses, galaxies are encased in huge amounts of cosmic dust. Now, to give your viewers an analogy, imagine you're landing, say, at LAX or London Heathrow, perhaps even better, and you've got fog. You can't see anything. There's fog. There's an airport there, and you're going to land there at Heathrow, but you can't penetrate the mask. Likewise, there are many masks, for example, in your body and mine. My skin is a mask. You can't see my spinal column. I can't see yours, which is very good when one is dating because you don't want to be dating another spinal column, right? And so the point is, sometimes you need X-ray eyes. Radiologists need X-ray eyes. But at other times, you've got this cosmic fog, curtains, if you like, between the stars and shrouding out the stars or structures of galaxies, and you need to work in the near infrared. Now, when I visited Reasons to Believe first, in 1990, I think it was, I flew from here, Los Angeles, to Hawaii, to the Mauna Kea observatories. And this is one of the first near-infrared cameras, large format cameras, used. Apparently, they were declassified by the US military because they were used to spy on moving targets in the former Soviet Union. Incredible. And so they were declassified. And I was privileged to be one of the first astronomers to use these large format arrays in Mauna Kea. And I requested my collaborators to put the telescope on a galaxy. And I was stunned. I was blown right out of my mind. Suddenly there was structure I'd never seen before, much like me looking at you, and then suddenly I'm seeing your spinal column. There's so much structure we saw. And you know, Fuzz, as a biochemist yourself, you would know about Nature. Right. It's the world's most reputable scientific journal. I mean, Watson and Crick cracked the DNA code and published in Nature. Well, the results of my near-infrared work and our near-infrared observations were featured on the cover of Nature, not only in Nature, but on the cover of Nature. And so that was birthing my interest in infrared astronomy, near-infrared astronomy. Now, the beauty with this telescope is that it can start penetrating shrouds of the night, clouds of cosmic dust, on scales we could never, ever have dreamt before. And I think, before I go on to elucidate some of the discoveries, that to me is the key focus of James Webb, is its power to penetrate these shrouds of the night in the near-infrared region of the electromagnetic spectrum.
So it's not just simply that the James Webb Telescope is giving us better resolution.
No, not at all.
But it's actually giving us a
new view.
A new view of the universe.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Incredible.
That's the whole point, is it's not just bigger, which it is compared to Hubble and so on. It's not only better technology, these 18 hexagonal mirrors and so on opening up like petals. No, it's the fact that it's the world's greatest orbiting infrared telescope. Yeah. The only predecessor is worthy of mention at this time is the Spitzer Space Telescope, which also worked wondrously in the infrared, but it was so small. Okay. This one is just, and this telescope too is placed behind the moon, so it's beautifully dark, and it can survey the skies for hours and hours on end, highest resolution but correct wavelength.
Yeah, okay. Fascinating. So then, what are some of the discoveries that you think are, or the images maybe I should say, and the discoveries connected with them?
That's a lovely question. When I was schooled in galaxies and cosmology, we were taught that galaxies formed top-down structures, which means simply this. You start off with an island universe, an island galaxy, and then the galaxy starts evolving or changing with time, and it may develop an elongated central feature called a bar, but they regarded galaxies as pretty isolated units. These were the world's leading astronomers at the time, including Alan Sandage. And the leading paradigm at the time was that galaxies are closed systems, dynamically closed systems. In other words, they don't really interact with anything else. You've got this island universe, this galaxy, say our Milky Way, and it forms top down. Now, the other scenario was, of course, completely discarded, and that's a bottom-up scenario. Now, in that scenario, one galaxy collides with another galaxy, and it starts forming the overall appearance of the galaxy or morphology of the galaxy over eons of time. And so that was completely discarded in the textbooks. I mean, all textbooks spoke about monolithic collapse. Famous papers, Fuz, which suggested that that's how galaxies actually form. So we're looking at the very heart of the formation of galaxies. And then I was the team leader of an infrared study to look at the Andromeda spiral galaxy, which is on our doorstep, 2.2 million light years. And we found that there was a near head-on collision about 250 million years ago, a near head-on collision. And of course, that was an infrared study, and that suggested that galaxies are dynamically open systems, not dynamically closed systems, and that they are interacting all the time, galaxies colliding one with another and, fusing together, and very dynamically open systems. And that is what I saw and see with the James Webb Space Telescope over and over again, is if you look at these very distant galaxies, they definitely dynamically open. That was surprise number one. Yeah. But surprise number two is that also at redshifts of around 13 or 14, you've got galaxies which are already like parent universes. They're already well formed. This is a great mystery. We still don't understand that too well, but this is a great mystery, is that these galaxies are fully formed with a giant molecular molecular clouds of cosmic gas and dust. And of course, I love unsolved problems because it makes us think.
Right.
But the other thing, of course, is wonderful, absolutely glorious evidence, Fuz, for the handiwork of God. How so? Because when you look at these images, I think of the first one, which was released by President Biden, you see all those arcs, zillions of arcs. Well, not zillions, but dozens of arcs. Those are gravitational arcs lensed by galaxies. So you've got a distant galaxy, for example. The light moves across a foreground cluster of galaxies, which acts as a gravitational lens. The light bends and is seen as an arc on planet Earth. And you've got dozens of those arcs in the first image, which again is wonderful evidence for Big Bang cosmology, but cosmology on the grander sense, using general relativity, understanding that the universe has a beginning, not only in cosmic space, but in cosmic time, but that general relativity is absolutely viable for the understanding of Big Bang cosmology, predicting these arcs. I just wish Albert Einstein could be a fly on the wall now with these incredible images.
So so when you demonstrate not only a Big Bang universe, but the reliability of general relativity, that has implications in terms of time and space having a beginning. It's not just the matter and energy, but it's space and time, right?
Yes. You know, Fuz, that's so interesting because so many people say to me, Professor David Block, what was God doing before he created the heavens and the earth? And the interesting thing, Fuz, is that question doesn't make any sense because time comes into existence at t equals 0, the Big Bang, at t equals 0. So there's no before. If you ask me, what was I doing before I came to studio? Well, I was walking to the studio. We know that because time exists.
Right.
But when you ask the question, what was God doing before the Big Bang? There's no before because there's no time. It's just so wonderful to go into those realms of his transcendence, is it not? And also of his eminence.
Well, you know, it's interesting because for us, we can't even conceive what a reality would be like if there isn't time, right? And I think it was a John Barrow quote that I found someplace where he said something like, "Once upon a time there was no time," right? So you can't even articulate really the concept of no time, but this speaks to our finite nature.
Exactly.
But what I find just astounding is within Scripture is embedded this notion that time had a beginning.
Absolutely.
So it's such a foreign, counterintuitive idea that for writers like the Apostle Paul to say, before time began, God is setting up this plan of redemption. It's just, astounding, isn't it?
It is. And if you think of this, Jesus is asked and replies, before Abraham was, I am. And that's incredibly important because that's eternity in a nutshell. There's no time in eternity. So it's I am. He's ever present. Behold, the Lamb of God slain from the foundation of the world is now. The I am, literally, when a sinner repents, is crucified now. This is very interesting. It's as if the crucifixion is taking place now. God exists outside of space and of time. But when he does manifest himself on earth, he manifests himself as the great I am. And, I've been reading so much while I've been here, Fuz, as a visiting scholar, about the Lord saying, "Oh, Father, glorify thy Son, that thy Son might glorify thee." It's a wonderful discussion, a beautiful, harmonious discussion between God who is eternal and then God who is manifest, the Logos in the flesh.
Yeah. Fascinating. So what else about the James Webb images do you find fascinating? Do you find interesting?
I think that its images of stellar nurseries are unbelievable. I've produced actually a little juxtaposition of a Van Gogh image with a James Webb Space Telescope image. And I just, God said to me many years ago, Fuz, behold, I will give you the treasures of darkness and the hidden riches of secret places, that thou mayest know that I, the Lord, am the God of Israel, the treasures of darkness. And I was one of the first people to really push, I was one of the first, not the first, but one of the, to really push for the fact that cosmic dust is here to stay, and it's not just a nuisance, it's ultra important. And now when I look at images by the James Webb Space Telescope of these stellar nurseries, I'm blown away, because not only do I see the clouds of cosmic dust, but now in the infrared, I see the clouds of cosmic dust are penetrated. We're able to see through, and we can see the birth of stars, writhing, seething, ultraviolet radiations, carving out pillars, sculpturing like Rodin, like Michelangelo with a block of marble. We see the veritable hand of God in these stellar nurseries. I can't tell you how excited I am by these exquisite images. It's such a privilege to be living at this time, Fuz.
Yeah. So what does this tell you about God?
To me, I mean, that's lovely. To me, and it sounds very simplistic, but to me, it emphasizes over and over and over again two things. The heavens declare the glory of God, but secondly, what is man that thou art mindful of him? What is man that thou art mindful of him? And of course, this is where the really a key expert is man, with his cells, with his biochemistry. What is man? That God not only works on the big scale and the anthropic principles which we can discuss on the cosmological scales, but also anthropic principles on the very smallest of scales. And so when I look at images from the James Webb, I'm blown away, but I'm like a little boy with new toys, Fuz. I just look and I say, the heavens, Fuz, don't only proclaim the knowledge about God, but the heavens declare the glory of God. It's just like Jesus with some of his disciples, him being transfigured on the mount, and they behold not him only, but his glory.
Yeah. Well, I have a talk that I just recently put together about God is an artist.
Wonderful.
And so oftentimes I think when we as Christian apologists think about God and we think about the scientific case for God, we almost treat God as a divine engineer. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
No.
Where everything is just the way that it's supposed to be, and it is. But oftentimes I think that is an impoverished view of God. When you think about God as an artist,
lovely.
Right now when we look at the universe, or we look even at the structure of a protein, there's an elegance, there's a beauty that really, I think, reflects something profound about God's nature, as a creator, right?
Absolutely.
When I see the Genesis 1 creation account, right? That each day after each day of creation, God says it is good.
Isn't that lovely?
And in Hebrew, that word "good" can mean beauty, or things are exactly the way that they are intended to be. So it's almost as if after each day of creation, God anthropomorphically is standing back and just says, admiring his work. And then he's created us as creatures in his image that can likewise step in and admire his work and
be an artist too.
And be an artist too.
Be an artist too. I love that. As a scientist, we can be an artist too.
Exactly. But maybe one of my favorite passages of Scripture comes from Psalm 104.
Yes.
And this is a creation psalm, and it parallels Genesis 1. So it's fun to sit down with Genesis 1 and Psalm 104 and see that correspondence. But there's a point that I think corresponds to the fifth day of creation, where it talks about God creating the Leviathan, probably a whale or a dolphin, to frolic among the ships. That is the whole purpose of God's in God's mind for creating this creature is to play, right? That there's
It's lovely.
That there's a beauty to the creation, but there's a playfulness,
absolutely,
right, to God.
I
the
agree
artist.
with that wholeheartedly.
Yeah, and so and so it's just, I don't know. It's fun to think about God as an artist. To me, it's deeply meaningful. Right?
And also, God is a joyous artist.
Yes, exactly.
You know, it's not just like an artist who's not passionate about his creation. He's a joyful artist. Yeah. He exuberates with joy, doesn't he? Yeah. Throughout the Gospels, when you look at this, there's the joyful, there's the joy, one of the fruits of the Spirit, joy. He goes out, and I think with his palette of colors, makes all these stellar maternity wars and the whole universe and the Big Bang and everything besides, and looks back and it's good. But it's with joy. Yeah. He loves to create. He loves. I think that's impregnated in us, right? Imago Dei.
Yes. Well, you know, it's very interesting because one of the big conundrums in evolutionary biology is how do you explain the origin of what's called our aesthetic sense? That is, human beings, we have this capacity to appreciate beauty, but instead of just simply looking at something and say, oh, that's beautiful, we immerse ourselves in beauty. We are compelled to spend countless hours contemplating beauty. And as you pointed out, and then in turn, we want to create things that are beautiful.
Absolutely, we do.
And when I make something that I think is beautiful, I want to show it to you and invite you to spend time contemplating what I have made, right? And there's nothing that imparts any kind of survivability to human beings to do this, because the more time you spend contemplating that which is beautiful, the more time you spend, you know, obsessing about creating things that have no utility other than the joy that it brings us to create it and then to share that creation with others. That detracts from our survivability. But if you think about human beings being made in God's image,
absolutely,
and we are in a sense co-creators.
Absolutely, we are. We really are. I mean, when I go to Rome, when I go to Paris, and I look at Rodin's work and so on, it's magnificent. And Rodin loved to create. Michelangelo loved to create. And the point is this also, Fuz, is it not, is we always taught survival of the fittest. That sounds so hard. It sounds so mechanistic, doesn't it?
Yes.
But there's this joyfulness to God, this playfulness. He's setting his laws, you know, creating the fine tunings of the Big Bang and just host besides in the anthropic principle, but doing so with joy. It's not just, you know, I've never looked at myself as just surviving. I remember I once had a professor, a colleague at university, and I always asked him for 25 years, how are you doing, John? And he said, I'm surviving. And I thought, how tragic. The man is only surviving. And somehow that's kind of a takeaway from the evolutionistic, you know.
Well, you know, let me tell you a story about this idea of surviving. You know, I collect comic books. That's my confession. So it's a totally frivolous activity, but it's just something I enjoy doing. Well, there's a comic book store that I frequent, and usually when I come out of the store, sitting on the bench by the store is a guy that I've gotten to know who's homeless. And I've gotten to know him and kind of become friends with him. And one time he was needing some money, and I always just give him a little bit. And he said, I'm so grateful for this. I'm going to go and buy a notebook and a pencil because I love to write. And I'm sitting here thinking, here's a guy living on the streets, right? Not knowing where his next meal is coming from, not knowing where he's going to sleep that night. And when he gets a little money, what does he want to do? He wants to spend that money to have the chance to create something.
Unbelievable.
So it's
unbelievable.
It's not what's driving him isn't a need to survive. It's the need to create. That's the beauty of the image of God, right? The glory of God to me was manifested in that one
such
moment.
A beautiful story,
right?
And it's part of who we are. Every time I'm researching some new phenomenon, there's a joy behind it. There's, you you feel, wow, I've
Yeah.
written this book, or I've written this article, or we've made this discovery. And to me, that's, isn't it true that entheos, in God, enthusiasm, comes from the Lord himself? The Lord is not sitting there as some mechanistic engineer making images and wanting them just to survive, and only the fittest survive. Fuzz, when I think back to my schooling at high school, the way I was bullied and so on, and the survival of the fittest was the key. Only the fittest apparently would survive. But my new book is called The Tribe Has Not Spoken. In other words, the tribe had spoken. In their view, they had delivered the final vote. There's no future for David Block because he's not the fittest as far as sports goes or as far as other things go. But praise God, because his image is impregnated within my soul, I could rise above that bullying, look at the stars, look at Saturn and its moons, look at Jupiter, which is on my tie, and come out with joy and eventually come to know my Creator face to face.
Yeah. Well, something that you mentioned is, I think is something that most people don't appreciate, is that scientists and engineers are actually very creative people.
Correct.
They're very much as much creatives as artists who would paint or who would write music or write poetry. That it's not left brain, right brain, but there's enormous amount of creativity.
I love that.
But what's interesting to me is that God has given us this pleasure of being able to discover his artistic work. And so that as we express the image of God and become creative, and through that creativity understand nature and understand and develop the ability through that creativity to probe nature, we're rewarded with even a greater glimpse into the artistry and the glory and the majesty of God.
Absolutely.
So it's not like science robs the creation
Not at all.
of the beauty, but it actually augments the beauty, right? And it gives us, surprising opportunities to see beauty where we wouldn't even imagine it. I'm a biochemist, and there was an incredible paper about the distribution of fatty acids that are found in nature. That fatty acids have different chain lengths. And it turns out that the distribution of fatty acid chain lengths corresponds to the Fibonacci
the Fibonacci series.
Right. And so here's this.
Yes, it's amazing.
When you look at biochemical systems and you see this menagerie of fatty acids that don't make any sense, and then somebody comes along and applies the golden rule, right?
Exactly.
Exactly.
There's beauty, there's elegance, there's design, there's thought.
That suddenly is exposed.
Exactly. And following the Fibonacci series too, on the very smallest of scales.
Right. And that golden triangle is considered to be this type of symmetry that is perceived as human beings as being incredibly beautiful.
Absolutely.
So you see that golden triangle structure in the galaxies, in the distribution of fatty acids.
It's
of all things,
it's
right?
amazing.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. But you used the word pleasure. And God has pleasure in creating, but so do we. As a young student in cosmology, I've started studying general relativity. And my first paper was published in London. I think I was 20 years old. But anyway, there's the elegance, there's the pleasure, Fuzz, of understanding things like, which sound terribly complex, active and conformally active symmetries in metrically automorphic spacetimes, admitting linear, collinear, very complex things, Lie algebras and killing vectors and so on, but beautiful. The fact that space-time is curved, it's beautiful, it's mathematical, it's elegance, it's imagination, it's the human imagination coming out to its highest levels of imago Dei. And it gives me pleasure to do that. And I know Einstein had a tremendous amount of joy in formulating his field equation.
Now, let me ask you this question, and hopefully it's not an unfair question. I'm just curious. Do you think mathematics is discovered or is it invented?
I think maybe both. I think that there's the discovery part, but there's the discovery part. But in other words, I'd like to answer your question. It's beautiful. Is mathematics the language of God? Well, it's not the only language God uses. Of course, God is love and much besides, and there's the aesthetic, the beauty part of God. But I think impregnated into the structure of the Big Bang, of course, is relativistic astrophysics and cosmology. And so I think the language of God is to be considered on many different levels. You've got God is love and so on and so on and so on. But one of the languages of God is the DNA, of course, right? And another language of God is simply the equations of general relativity and much besides that. So you've got it. I think you've got this on all different levels. I think God would speak in quote unquote many different languages. What are your thoughts with regard to that and say DNA, the language of God?
Yeah, well, what's remarkable to me is, you've got this incredibly elegant language, but the more we study mathematically the structure of the biochemical language, the more and more it appears to be similar to the language that we would construct as human beings. So in other words, if you analyzed human language mathematically, you see the same kinds of patterns in the language of biochemistry.
Wonderful.
To the point where you have biochemists developing what they call a biochemical grammar, where they can literally develop these grammatical rules that apply to the language of biochemistry, and then use that grammatical language to predict the design of new biomolecules. They can use that grammar and go in the lab and actually create biomolecules with that set of rules. That to me is so provocative because language.
It's language.
There is a real language there that is identical to the language that we engage in.
And yet it's so different from my mathematical language. So God is using, but doesn't it tie in beautifully with Scripture? Actually, now that I'm thinking of it, and God said.
Yes.
And God said. In other words, He spoke. And in that speech are languages at multifaceted levels. From your world to my world to the world of general relativity and much besides. He spoke, but there are many different languages in that one moment of speaking. And it's actually beautiful.
Well, in the universe and everything in the universe is God's spoken word to us.
Exactly.
Right?
That's correct.
That's amazing. Well, in terms of this idea of mathematics, and I don't know where I come down on it either, but it's a lot of fun to think about it. But it's remarkable to me that you could have mathematicians create these mathematical systems. They invent these mathematical systems. And then, to everybody's surprise, those systems suddenly have utility in explaining some kind of phenomena in the universe.
I think that's beautiful. I think that's beautiful.
And I think this may very well connect or find explanation in the idea that we bear God's image.
Absolutely.
Somehow, when we create, when we invent, we are unwittingly doing things that echo what the Creator has already done.
Absolutely.
And and you mentioned the idea of the biochemical language. One of the things I find so fascinating as a biochemist is there seems to be this interplay between the technology we invent and the structure and the function of biochemical systems.
Wow. I'd love you to elaborate on that.
Well, so for example, when we encounter a biochemical system and we try to understand how it works, many times by viewing it through the lens of the technologies that we build, suddenly we get that insight that suggests this is how the system is functioning. But then we now have technologists looking at the design of biochemical systems, and then from that suggesting insights that lead to new technologies. So let's go back to DNA, right? It's an information system.
Absolutely. It's a language.
And the structure of DNA is so optimized to store information.
Absolutely.
And this is one of the things I bring out in my book, Fit for a Purpose, is I explain how every minute detail of the DNA molecule is precisely the way it needs to be for it to function as an information storage system. It's so optimized that some people have said it's the theoretical maximum in terms of storing information per mass. And so we now have technologists looking at developing the next generation of data storage devices built from DNA. And so instead of compact discs and magnetic tapes, we're now going to, in the next generation, have DNA storage devices because the information in DNA is digitized. That to me is fascinating.
It is fascinating.
But then the machinery that manipulates DNA, like in DNA replication and transcription, literally is operating like a computer system. The cell's machinery. This is an insight of a computer scientist by the name of Leonard Adleman, who looked at these biochemical systems and said, these are literally Turing machines.
Wow.
Where the digital information is the input and the output, and the enzymes are the finite controls that are transforming that information.
Isn't that beautiful?
And so Adleman, with this insight, went off and invented a whole area of nanotechnology called DNA computing, where scientists are building computers out of DNA. And they're wet computers in these little test tubes. And because you can generate massive parallel operations, you actually have the capacity to solve problems that current state-of-the-art supercomputer systems can't solve.
Exactly. And that's another part of Imago Dei, as you say. We model things, in this case biochemistry, in my case mathematically, but then we use them. They become real. That's what you're saying. They become real. Whether we look at it, computers built that way or in my field, they become real. They become applicable, not only to the microcosm, but also to the macrocosm. And that's astonishing.
Yeah. But if you think about this, if we and the rest of biology is just the outworking of some kind of materialistic, mechanistic, unguided, purposeless force, why would there be this interplay between the mathematics we create in the operation of the universe, the technology we invent, and the technology inside the cell?
We are created in His image.
Right, exactly. That seems like the Christian worldview that talks about a creator putting everything in place and human beings as his image bearers that can understand the creation, or at least get a glimpse of an understanding.
A glimpse of it.
Yeah, the Christian worldview has power to make sense of what science and technology is all about.
I think what you're saying, Fuz, it's not only a creator who creates the universe and is distant and then goes to bed for 14 billion years. He doesn't do that. He's involved with his creation as an artist, as one who loves beauty, as one who loves to inspire others to dream. And that's one of my mottos actually in life, is to tell audiences around the world, always look up. Why? Because there's always that sense of wonder. There's always that sense of, we'll develop a mathematical model today and tomorrow James Webb will reveal that it is correct. That's powerful. The predictive nature of the Baconian method is extraordinary.
Yeah. And it speaks of a God who's not only an artist, but a God who is a God of order and design. Because if it wasn't for the orderliness of the universe, if it wasn't for the fact that the laws of nature are constant, that science would be impossible.
Absolutely. Science would be impossible.
Right. Yes. And we couldn't even know right and wrong. This is a point that I've heard philosophers make, that morality is only possible in a predictable, orderly universe.
It is.
Yeah, so it's amazing, how science just opens up this wonder and these questions that, when you hold to a Christian worldview, are just so inspiring
and so profound. If you think of the anthropic cosmological principle, for example, and you think of the fine-tunings of our universe, not only the rate of expansion of the universe, fine-tuned to 1 in 10 to the 55, or 1 followed by 55 zeros, but if you look at the weak nuclear force, the strong nuclear force, the electromagnetic force field, the gravitational force, force field and many other force fields besides, you see order. And the point is, without that order, you and I wouldn't be having this conversation today. That's the point too, is we can only be creative artists if the universe is exactly as it is.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think we're running out of time, and you know what? I'll save my my discussion of endogenous retroviruses for a future episode, because this conversation has been a lot more fun than talking about infectious agents.
It's been awesome.
Because you are a very infectious person, and I mean that in a good way, of course.
Thank you, Fuz.
But thank you so much for taking the time to be with us on Star Cells and God, and really just giving us a glimpse into the beauty of the cosmos, and a glimpse into your heart and the passion that you have for science, but also the passion you have for God Himself.
Yes.
And it's mind-blowing to think, David, that you and I can have an intimate relationship with this Creator who brought everything into existence.
Absolutely.
That is what's beyond imagination to
And
me.
it gives us pleasure.
Exactly. All right. Well, thanks so much for watching this episode of Star Cells and God. I hope that you are inspired by the conversation I had with Dr. David Block. I would invite you to make sure you go to our website and check out reasons.org and all the resources we have that allow you to explore the relationship between science and the Christian faith. Also, follow us on social media. Go to our YouTube channel, Reasons to Believe 1, subscribe, hit the notification button, and then last but not least, keep in mind that the more we discover about science, the more we discover reasons to believe. Until next time, God bless you.